and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and it's been 7,689 days since we last made a grand final. And on Friday night, we booked a place on the last Saturday in September, and hopefully we can end the drought, put an end to the curse, and vanquish our mental demons, and finally taste premiership glory. Joining me tonight, long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy, and good evening to all the D-Leavers out there. And hopefully tonight we'll find out the answer to the really big questions about what has happened to us this year. Importantly, how is Andy's MFCSS going, and what will his ladder predictor say tonight?
Well, the ladder predictor, we're down to 2, so I've got a 50-50 chance. I can't really... Well, I can get it wrong, but I can't get it too wrong. But speaking of the MFC SS, and it's funny that you should mention it. And for those new listeners, because we do have a lot of new listeners, it's the MFCSS is the Melbourne Football Club Supporters Syndrome. It was coined many years ago by a Demonlander, referring to the decades of disappointment Demon fans have experienced over the years through finals droughts, limited successes, false dawns, dashed hopes. It's that veil of negativity that surrounds a lot of us, myself included. Thankfully, it hasn't infected my co-hosts. But I must say, I was on cloud 9 after our win on Friday night. I was brimming with confidence, and that's unprecedented in my 40-plus years as a Demon. However, that confidence was crushed not 24 hours later whilst watching the Dogs dismantle the power, and we'll talk more about that later on. Needless to say, my MFCSS came back with a vengeance, but hopefully tonight your positivity can pump me back up. But also just on the MFCSS, Demonland poster Amsterdam D's fan came up with the perfect intro for this week's show, and I think he nailed it, and I'll read his script. This is Andy. Good evening, Demonlanders. The Demons beat Geelong by 83 points with the Dogs thrashing Port Adelaide in the other game. My MFCSS is worse than ever, and I can't help think that this is just setting us up for the greatest of disappointments, losing the grand final in a repeat of 1954. George, if beating the Cats 3 times in one season hasn't cured your MFCSS, nothing will. Bin Man. Don't worry, Andy, we'll smash him, absolutely smash him. And I think, end scene, I think that is perhaps the most accurate description of our podcast. And speaking of the man with all the positivity, who I think with his rosy outlook in our previous show where we previewed the preliminary final, it helped me get through last week, despite me still shitting myself in the lead up to the first bounce. Hopefully he can get me through the next 12 days. Bin Man, good evening, Bin Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And Tony T posted not long after that he sort of noted my overconfidence, and you just saw rosy. I'm just being a realist. It's we're the best team in the AFL. We showed it last week, and just a fantastic victory. And my confidence is going to be pretty hard to dent over the next 2 weeks, although it's a lot of time to analyse what could go wrong. But I reckon, Andy, just for you, we should be focusing on what's going to go right.
Yes, absolutely. And I think those people that say things like Tony T did, that's MFCSS. We can't let ourselves be happy, and it doesn't infect all of us, but it does infect some of us. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of dissecting the preliminary final, I guess the way we'll do the podcast tonight is we'll talk about our match, we'll talk about go quarter by quarter, the tactics that won us the game, we'll go through the different lines of the team, note some individual efforts. It'll be hard narrowing it down, and we'll try to keep it brief. We'll talk about the other preliminary final, our opponents, the Bulldogs, but we won't do a deep dive into a preview of the grand final. We'll do a preview show for the granny next week, like we did last week for the preliminary final. I know that might be hard not to talk about it, but we'll try. We'll keep any talk we talk about the Bulldogs and the game ahead in brief. But what we might do first, before we get into talk about the game, is just give our general feelings on making the grand final. It's something that is rare in my time. This is only the third time in my 44 years that we've made the grand final. So this doesn't happen every day, you know. And I remember in '88, I thought, we'll be playing premierships all the time. 2000, I thought we had a good team. We'll be up there again. But it turns out 21 years later, and we're just finally making it again. So these things don't happen. So I just want to get a sense from you guys how you're feeling now, how you were feeling during the game. When was it in that game that you knew we were through? It took me a while, even when we were 70 points up. I'm still, wait, can they come back from here? But that's my own. I need to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist about those issues. How are you feeling the next day? Your general feelings about our opponents without going into too much specifics. How are your nerves? What are you planning on this week? How are you soaking up the time? And have you decorated, most importantly, have you decorated your house? Start with you, George.
There's a lot to cover
off there, lot to cover, so yeah.
We'll start right at the top then. This is what Ben Man and I have been saying and trying to convince Andy all year. We're the best side in the competition. We've been at the top for longer than anybody else in 2021. We deserve to be where we are simply because we are the best at the moment. When the game started, even before, I was reminded of when I sat in the 2018 crowd when we played Geelong. And when Geelong ran out on the ground, they just looked old. They were hobbling. They just really looked like a second-rate side. And as it turned out, we gave them a good beating in that game. And this was the same in this game, as although we could only see it on the television. Harry Taylor barely made it onto the ground in 2018, and Henderson was the same this year for them. When they're standing arm in arm, or the Demons are standing arm in arm during the national anthem, and the Dogs are looking like they're in a row for execution, that's exactly what happened during the game. So,
you mean the Cats?
The Cats, yeah. Sorry, the Cats, yeah.
And before you go on, I noticed that happened in the 2018 as well. They don't link arms. I know it doesn't mean you're going to win the game because you link the arms, but it's strange. And they did that in all. I think you need a bit of that camaraderie, but I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it just shows you the message that's been coming from our coaches and the team that this is a team. We're all in this together, and I think that's always useful. Although we try not to read too much into the entrails of animals about portents that might happen, but it certainly sends the same message all the time. It's all about team. I was pretty confident halfway through the first quarter when we actually started playing, got over the nerves, started to instill our systems. The players were hitting their targets. They were doing their jobs. And as soon as we started doing that, we started to make Geelong looking pretty ordinary. By halftime, I was certain of the outcome of the game. They'd thrown that best at us. Then the best wasn't really much, as it turned out. So halfway through was the point for me. The damn wall broke in the next quarter, and that was certainly confirmed. The next day was interesting, though, because I think, like a lot of Demons fans, we thought, how far is it going to be for us in the grand final against Port Adelaide? And then the Bulldogs came out and absolutely demolished them. But then post the match, you sort of sit back and you go, yeah, that's because the Bulldogs were the second best side in the competition during the year. They got there a little bit harder than what we've managed to get through, but they're really seriously good challengers. They play a game style that's similar to ours, and the teams that didn't make it, as Ben Mann will probably explain later, are ones who are playing old-fashioned type football. This is all about chaos and working as a team and helping your mates out, and that's what we're seeing the Bulldogs as well. The nerves are okay at this point about the future. We've got this. We're the best. We're still the best. We've got the best coaching crew possible. We've got the best training and fitness staff possible in Darren Burgess, and that's been proven for the whole season with the lack of injuries. We've got a full list to pick from, essentially. So we're in as good a position as we possibly can be for the next 2 weeks. As far as decorations, I tried to convince She Who Must Be Obeyed, but and I showed her the picture of that M9 posted up on the sign about the house at Jan Jack owned by Steve, and he's painted the whole house red and blue. And I was advised that I could move in with Steve if I wanted to.
That would happen with me too.
Yeah, so no decorations allowed at her house.
No, well, I did put up some decorations. I got a pack from the club with some Melbourne jumpers that are meant to be on a string. I cut the string off and I've put on my fence stuck up these Melbourne jumpers, but I did that all under the cover of darkness at about 11 p.m. on Friday night. Bin Man, how are you feeling about this? When did you know we had got through? When did you feel? I'm sure from the first bounce you probably did. Feelings the next day, feelings about the opponents, your nerves leading into the granny and your decoration plans.
Friday, it was just such a long day. I just could not believe. I kept on looking at the clock, and even though it was a digital clock on my thing, I was sort of imagining, the hands of the clock going forward and then going back in one of those scenes from an old movie. Just didn't seem to want to get there. And, I had organised a Zoom meeting with a bunch of Melbourne fans to sort of get into the energy of the game because, if it was in Melbourne, it would be a bunch of us catching up at the pub before walking to the G and try to get that energy. So that was really good. In terms of, I wasn't nervous about the game in the sense that, like I was saying last week, I guess my nerves were, would we bring it? And they would still have to go up a level, but I'm really confident that we'd bring it. And you could tell basically from the very first play was how the game, I was going to ask you to clip it up, but right from the very first bounce it was just like pure Melbourne because they actually won the centre clearances. The clearance ended up being at the back of the contest and Selwood kicked it forward. Salem marked it, and that started the chain. It ended up with Brown taking a mark on the lead that I thought for all the world was going to go through.
It was going through, but then it just started turning and hit the post.
I thought, oh, what a great start. But it was a great start because it was basically the template for the match. And, we'll get into it a bit more, but I thought right then we're on. Even though they scored the first goal, it felt like just so often this year where the opposition's goals come sort of out the back or scrappy or they just never looked on and we looked super on. And again, we'll talk about it, but, it makes such a difference putting the score on the board. So for me, I thought the game was over halfway through the first quarter. And so then it was really party time. It was phenomenal game to watch. One of the best games of footy I've ever seen, full stop. One of the most enjoyable. I said last week that it's really, that this team deserves a big crowd. And so, regardless of wanting to be there, the MCG was empty. So if it had been played in Melbourne, if there happened to have been COVID cases in Western Australia, it would have been played probably at the MCG in front of no one. And that just would have been, the players, have worked so hard and they've been so terrific this year. They didn't deserve that. So I was really thrilled at the crowd. I was really thrilled at the energy. It really looked great on television. I think that, for me, watching the game was just thrilling, and I don't recall ever in the whole time I barracked for Melbourne, since probably the mid-70s, I've never ever seen a quarter like that from a player. Max Gorn's quarter in the third was, as the commentators were laughing because it was so absurdly good. So I was thrilled. The whole match was just unbelievable. It was like a wave hit Geelong, and Geelong were never, ever going to get back. And in fact, the worst thing that Geelong could have done was kick those final two goals at the first half because it obviously gave them ammunition. I'm sure that's exactly what Goody would have said. And it meant that we came out and breathed fire in that third quarter. So, that third quarter was one of the best quarters of footy I can ever recall seeing. And, everything was working. So it was a, magic quarter of footy. In terms of the nerves, the Port Bulldogs game, we might talk about that a little bit later, but I thought Port were terrible. I really like the Dogs anyway. I live over in the West, so the Dogs are a big part of the community out this way. And I like the way they play footy, and it's hard not to like Beveridge, but with his over the top sort of us against them stuff, it can get a bit grating. But so that game was, it was great that we'll be playing the Dogs. I would have preferred to play Port because I reckon we'd have a better chance of beating them. But, it's fantastic out my way that the D's are playing the Dogs. And so that's great for Melbourne, apart from the fact that, people here can't go. The nerves, I'm not really nervous. It's a bit like I was talking about last week. I'm sure I'll be nervous as I get close. I think that we're deserved favourites. We'll go in favourites. I think that, to be honest, the Dogs have got a better chance of rolling us than either Port or Cat. So, I'm not too nervous now, but I certainly will be. It seems like one day waiting on Friday felt a long time. Yeah. Already, it's like the calendar things are not falling off the calendar at all, are they? So it seems a long way away. But I guess we've got the Brownlow on Sunday, which will be terrific because Oliver's going to win it, and we've probably got any number of replays we can watch. So I'm going to watch the Geelong one, and then the Geelong round 23, Brisbane, and then of course I've already watched that replay 2 times. So I'm sure it'll get another run before the fortnight's out.
And have you decorated your house?
Have I No, I've decorated myself. So I've been wearing Melbourne gear now for at least something Melbourne at all times. So I'm wearing a beanie, even though it's very warm in here at the moment. I've been wearing a scarf today for my Zoom sessions. So, Melbourne socks. So I'm keeping myself decorated is the plan.
Very nice.
I can't get. I've been trying to paint the fence for about 10 years, but it's not working. I'm not getting that past my wife. So
I was very nervous, as you can imagine, but I had the added nerves. I've spoken how my brother-in-law and my 3 nephews, all Geelong supporters, we have a bet every year. I won the bet this year. The bet is who finishes higher on the ladder. It's not often that I win this bet. In fact, it's only the second time since the nephews have been alive that I've won the bet. The result is you have to wear the other team's jumper at the next family dinner that we have. COVID has scuttled that, but it's just an honour to have that title. But we had the prospect of me winning the bet, but them winning the war, and it just gave me so much pleasure to not just beat them in the preliminary final, but the way we did it. And I have given them their space, and I haven't spoken to them. My brother-in-law did text me congratulations, but I haven't, and I would love to really, because my nephews have mercilessly teased me over the years, and I would love to give it back to them, but I don't want to be hit by the karma bus. So there's so many times I've seen so many memes pop up about Geelong and their performance, and it's killed me not to sort of send it to our WhatsApp group, but I'll hold it off for a week, and hopefully I can gloat. Oh, who's not obeying the COVID laws there?
That's out here in the rough west. There's always something happening.
So all right, let's go into the breakdown of the like we did with the qualifying final. We'll go quarter by quarter. First quarter, big man, you're going to take that, but I must say I was wrapped as well with that opening of the game, as you mentioned. Within 30 seconds, I think we were taking a shot for goal, and my old friend Mr. Inaccuracy, not the player who was kicking it, but just in general, stepped in and robbed us of that major, and the rest of the quarter was a bit of a next 7 minutes was a bit of a 6 minutes was a bit of a seesaw before and they broke through for a goal, and then we piled on 5 and had an absolute dream start. It was fantastic. That's what we want to do in the grand final.
Yeah, and I won't go, rather than sort of going like last week through it, sort of play by play, some key stats in there I thought that really sort of set the tone for the game and reflected really, that were established early and played out was that we got 4 forward half clearances and kicked 3 zip from them. So we'd got already the 24-minute mark, we had 3 goals from forward half clearances, which was just amazing. And then Selwood led their possessions at the end of the quarter. He had 7 possessions, but he had turned over 4. And that was all about the pressure we were putting on them. And the very first kick of the game was the one that I mentioned, where they won the clearance, but it was on their defensive side of the contest, as pretty much all their clearances were. Under pressure, he kicked it out and it ended up going out towards the wing. I mean, that was rinse and repeat all day. So the other thing that around Selwood that really jumped out at me, and I thought about you, George, is Selwood went straight to Oliver. Now, as we talked about last week, you've got your 2 starting mids or your 2 sort of proactive and aggressive mids, or should be Oliver and Track for us, and Dangerfield and Selwood for them. Well, instantly they took away one of their weapons and put them on one of our weapons. And whilst he kept him relatively quiet, he still ended up, for him, he ended up in the end of the match by, mid-20 possessions, I think 27 or something, Oliver. But, that to me was an incredibly negative thing to do right from the beginning. The other thing that sort of that template I thought was that halfway through, or the 20-minute mark of the first quarter, Jack Viney had already had 7 disposals, 5 of which were contested. And I thought, again, it was that, right for the whole match, he was just a star for us. And, obviously, and quite rightfully, a lot of focus on Maxi and Track, because both were just phenomenal. But really, Jack was the foundation on everything else that's built. He was ferocious in the contest. He was hard at it. He was tackling. And I think that, we were kicking goals from clearances. We were putting them under pressure. In the chat room, Engorged Onion says, maybe there's a better way of describing it than chaos. The phrase I heard during the week that I like is blitz football. And it's sort of a gridiron thing where, you blitz the opposition. And that's exactly what we were doing. And they looked like a team that was being blitzed, the Cats. So for me, that's why I was so sort of confident that that idea of the game was looking like how on our terms. It was so not on their terms. And probably the biggest sort of example of it not being on their terms was that they could only take 5 marks for the quarter. And they average, they're averaging the minimum they'd got in a quarter of football before that was 9. So they got 5 marks for the quarter, and only once in the whole season had they taken less than 10 marks in a quarter, and that was earlier in the season. So we held them to 5 marks, and they just couldn't get it. They couldn't get anything behind the ball. And the other thing they couldn't do is that they couldn't control the possessions. They couldn't, they just could not get it going. I think so. They ended up with 6 marks for the quarter, so the fewest that had since round 3, 2017, wow, in any quarter. So it's 4 years since they've taken so few marks. They average 103 marks per game this season, and they could only get 6 at the end of that quarter. And that's what I mean about we just took away their game. Their game is, as we've talked about, and as everyone talked about in the lead up to the game, is all about controlled possession. Well, they just could not control the ball at all. We completely controlled it with that blitz. Every time they tried to mark it, we spoiled them. They couldn't take any intercept marks behind, and and I think again, pointing towards the rest of the game, Brown was magnificent in his pressure, getting that last touch in to bring it to ground. I thought T-Mac was back to his best. All of the pointers were there for us for it being on our terms, and that's how the rest of the game played out. Just kept on snowballing from there, and they just couldn't get hold of the ball. It wasn't that they weren't trying to; they just couldn't ever get sort of unpressured play. That their whole game plan is built around. That's why they get so many marks is because that's the only way you can control it. Because the only way you can stop the game on your terms is to kick it and have someone mark it, or win a free. But then that's not on your terms. And so when you take that away from them, they're getting the ball in motion, but they can't go forward because no one's ahead. And every time they looked up again, our defensive zone was set up. So, for me, it was a sort of a perfect start. And again, the critical thing was we were accurate. So we took our chances when they came by and by. So I think, what was it, 5-3 at the end of the first quarter. So after that Brown miss, which, as I said, I thought was going to go through for sure, we only kicked 2 points after that. So
I think they were both rushed as well, maybe. So
one was Fritter that didn't make the distance, or he got punched through.
Yeah.
And the other thing was how disorganised they were defensively. As I was talking about last week, people pumped their tyres up about having a great defence. Well, they were woeful. One, they weren't taking any intercept marks, 0, basically. And 2, the goal that Harms got was, and probably to a lesser extent the one that Nibbler got, but the one Harms got was just a complete breakdown of defence. To allow a player to be able to collect and balance and take a couple of steps and kick from 40 was a bad sign for them. So for me, the only negative in that first quarter, and it turned out to be not such a bad thing, was May going down at the 20-minute mark. And the way they described it, I was sure he'd done his hammy for sure. And so I was already thinking 2 weeks, it's unlikely he'll get up. Well, who's going to come in,
With Abby Holmes saying he's in tears, that suggests to me that he's torn a hammy and he would know what a torn hammy feels like. And with language like that he's in tears, and I'm not saying he wasn't, but yeah, that made me worry.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me if he was, because he's quite an emotional fella, and he wants this so badly, doesn't he? And I love hearing him being interviewed. He's just so honest, and he's so for a bloke who's a big burly 6'4" or whatever he is, and he's our rock down defence. I love how also comfortable he is with that. So it didn't surprise me at all to hear that he was in tears. But I took it as a really bad sign, as obviously Abby Holmes did as well. So, at that point, I thought we had the game in keeping, but I was already thinking, hell, what does this mean for the grand final? So it was, to me, just icing on the cake for him to come back out, and seemingly he's okay. So, as I said, psychologically, I was already had already done the diagnosis, and he was out for 3 weeks, and he wasn't going to play in the grand final. So, but it didn't turn out to be a negative. And I just thought those things were really sort of set the game up for us. And by the end of the first quarter, it was clear that the game was on our terms. And it was interesting because Scott's lauded as a really good game day coach. And if you read Demonland, during the season, people, think some people think he's the coaching messiah in terms of his ability to pull a rabbit out of his hat on game day. And so I was wondering what they were going to do into the second quarter. And to me, the only thing they could do was, because we had that lead. So what was the margin? It was 27 points at quarter time. The only option you have at that point of the game is to go fast, because you never get that score back. And as we're talking about last week, that's a catch-22. You go fast, it plays into our hands. You're not going to make a 5-goal margin up on us by playing slow for the rest of the game. So, and George to do the second quarter. But I was really curious to see what Scott would do come the second quarter tactically, because he had to do something. He had to change the trajectory of that game, or it was game over. From where I sat, he didn't do much.
Well, you are welcome to chime in about the second quarter once George has finished. So, George, the second quarter, opened with a bit of goal for goal action, and we took the ascendancy after that. Towards the end, our inaccuracy reared its ugly head, and we missed 3 goals in a row that really would have put the nail in the coffin very early. Then they have 2 late goals to keep them in touch, and for me and all my MFCSS, I absolutely rue missed opportunities, as you know, because it can really bite you in the bum, particularly if you get some. If they would have got some early goals in the third, all of a sudden they have a sniff. Thankfully, in the third, the Max Gawn experience rolled into town, but we'll talk about that a bit later. So, George, take us through the second and your thoughts.
Yes, Binman sort of summed up the second quarter in terms of the first. It started with 27-point lead and it finished up with 29. So it was a bit of a slog, but that was only as far as the scoreboard was concerned.
But we really should have been up by more.
Oh, I absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. But I think what Geelong were trying to do, which was contrary to what Binman was suggesting, and I agree with Binman, they were trying to instill their game style back. During this quarter, they started to revert to the chip switch and kick it and possession type of game. Their other one is the contested possessions out of the middle. But again, they're coming up against Viney and Oliver and Petrarca in the middle. We matched them there. And the difference that the commentators pointed out in the middle was that while they were getting clearances out of the middle, they were always at the back of the circle. So when they're coming out, it goes out wide or it's under pressure because the other players in the middle are ahead of them. Whereas when we were getting the contested ball in the middle, it's coming out the front of the circle, and we go straight down the into the forward line, and we saw more of that in the third quarter. What was astounding though is the other aspect of Geelong's game style was gaining possession, particularly in the back line, intercept possessions, and then you slowly move the ball up the ground until you can turn it inbound to hit the people like Hawkins in the forward line. Halfway through the second quarter, Jack Henry, who is probably their equivalent of Jake Lever, had 0 possessions. Likewise, Kolodjasny had 0 possessions at the same time. So their backline was completely dysfunctional and disorganised. Partially, I think, because the Melbourne forwards were just cutting them to pieces and are not allowing them the opportunities to instill their game style around the ground. Whenever they tried to kick and switch, there were people in their face all the time. They'd look up and they couldn't see an option down the line. They couldn't see an option inbound. They just had nowhere to go, and it even slowed their game up even more, which was contrary to exactly what they needed to be doing. So we had control of the game. I thought we had control of the game from halfway through that first quarter, certainly. But the second quarter, even though the scoreboard didn't reflect it, we just took away everything that they had in terms of being able to change the momentum of the game. We just did what we wanted to do with them, basically. A couple of highlights out of it. We'll talk more about Max in a minute, but it's been a long time since I've seen a player drop kick the ball for a point for the opposition, but that's what Max managed to do at one point. What I really loved was when Rivers gave away a free to Brian Myers, and Lever came up to him and just said to him, "We need you to go for the ball." And just left it at that.
I think said, we need you at the drop of the ball. I think he said,
It was really silly as well that he held him, because, as the commentators noted, he wasn't going to take a mark.
But the thing was, in an indirect way, Lever was telling, concentrate on your game, do your job, play your role. And that's the sort of advice, Lever's all of 25 years of age or something like that. Just this leadership, the head screwed on the right way, and this young kid who's 20 or 21 by now, I suppose, just needed that little bit of guidance and not get upset about what's just happened. Just do what you've got to do and keep doing it. It was just great to see that happen. Stephen May came back onto the field. I was confident about that time that he hadn't done any damage, simply because if you looked when he came off in the first quarter, although he went down the rooms, he didn't come back with ice on it. That usually indicates that there hasn't been damage. I'm sure he would have been had the portable. They would have had the portable ultrasounds downstairs, and they would have determined there was no damage at that point, and so they didn't ice. And then when he came on, there was multiple. When he came back, there was multiple shots of him not having his hamstrings worked on, but rather his back. So, good chance it was just a nerve situation rather than actually a tear in the muscle, which everybody suspected at the start. But the important thing for that whole quarter was just pressure, and more pressure. They couldn't get anywhere. They couldn't do anything without having to go sideways to go backwards. We opened an opportunity. We got out to a 38-point lead after goals from Spargo, Sparrow, Gawn and Pickett. But then we managed to miss 3 goals. There was set shots from Fritsch and Petrarca. very gettable goals, particularly Fritsch's from about 30 directly in front. Brown put in, snapped, which bounced the wrong side of the goal post, could easily have gone either way. And then Geelong managed 2 late goals to finish the quarter, only 29 points in arrears, but it didn't matter. They were 5 goals, that 5 goals behind, similar to the end of the first quarter, but they just weren't in the contest. They didn't control the game. We controlled it, and it looked like that was going to continue for the remainder of the game. And then we'll see what happened in the third quarter, and Bin Man and Andy can tell us all about that.
Well, before Bin Man starts, I do have some audio. I've just got to cue it up here in a sec, but that third quarter was the Max Gawn show, and I think the performance has to put to bed any comparisons to Nick Nat or Grundy or Goldstein. Max Gawn is the premier ruckman in the competition. Bin Man, before you take us on the tour of the world of Max Gawn that we're all just living in, I'm just going to play this audio from Jason Dunstall on one of the footy shows.
It's the best ruck performance I have ever seen. Max Gawn. The greatest performance by a ruckman in my time. I've never seen anything that complete. 19 possessions, 33 hit-outs. He had 5 clearances himself, 6 tackles, including that great run down on Gary Rowan, and 5 goals, including a couple that would sit very nicely in the discussion about goal of the year. Yep. And what gets me is the way they feed off Max, his teammates. They take great joy in everything that he does. Look at that. That's a 1-on-3. He just forced himself upon them. That's the most complete captain's performance you could ever hope for. And to have a ruckman do that, people have sat there over the journey and waxed lyrical about Nick Nat and what he can do. No, I've never seen anyone do that from a ruckman's perspective. And the fact that he's captain as well, it was supreme.
If I could only watch one quarter, you said you can only watch one quarter again for the rest of your life, this is the quarter that I would watch. My only disappointing thing about it was there wasn't another 5 goals. But I just loved it. Bin Man, take us through.
It was incredible, wasn't it? Just before I do, just to pick up on George's point, that's a great point, George, about Lever. One of the things I've liked actually that's in the football commentary, and while I'm thinking of it, I thought Jason Bennett did a great job commentating. It was just so good to hear someone just commentate on football and stick to it.
Where's BT, by the way? Is he quarantining and that's why he couldn't commentate?
Perhaps he's been kidnapped. I hope so.
Yeah, well,
for the sake of all things.
I have a feeling he must be quarantining for the grand final, but I enjoyed it too.
Well, we've got something to look forward to then, but yeah, he did a great job. And one of I thought the coverage was pretty good. And one of the things that I've liked in this COVID 2 seasons is they've got better at using the mics on the umpire. And so it was great to hear Lever talk to Rivers. Rivers looked really furious with himself. It wasn't really what I liked, George, was the, go to the drop of the ball, but it was his encouraging tone. Like, you see sometimes over the journey, you've seen players get into young players.
Yeah, give him a spray.
Yeah, exactly. Or what are you doing? But he went out of his way. It was, a bit of advice.
A teaching moment.
Teaching. But also before that, it was a sort of a pat on the shoulder and a sort of pat on the chest. And it was like, it's all right. No worries. Reset, which has been the theme for the club all year, is about resetting. So I thought that was terrific. And you're right, George, they did look to get a little bit of they tried to get the ball on their, sort of the game on their terms a little bit. And, they took 12 marks in the last 10 minutes of that quarter where they'd taken 13 up till that point in the game in, 1 and 3 quarters. And they had a bit better run of it with the uncontested possession. So just the other thing about the second half is Viney ended up with 22 disposals in that half of footy, the most, the second most he's ever gotten a half a game of footy. So what a first half by a true leader. Jack, he's been awesome in the last handful of games.
I know we're going to talk about mids a bit later on, and Jack Viney will certainly come up. But what is it about Jack Viney and finals footy? It just and people have been saying it online. He's just he's built for finals footy. It sort of brings out his best, and it's not taking away anything from his home and away season form. But yeah, he just pulls it out in the finals.
It's his intensity, I think. And, it's his incredible sort of will to want that footy. And that sort of permeated right through the team. And the other stat that was amazing is that we smashed them on the ground ball get. We got 68-45 ground ball get in the first half. They'd only lost ground ball get by double figures once this season, and that was against us in round 4. And it was critical because they looked exactly like George said. They looked like an old team, because that's where the real test comes, when the ball hits the ground because you haven't marked it. Who wins that next contest? Because it's part technique, but it's sort of 1 part technique, 4 parts desire, and that's where Jack Viney goes to work, isn't it? Who's going to come between him and the footy when you've got players who maybe not quite as keen as him, and but that was right across the board. So that was incredible. 17, plus 17 in ground ball get at half of footy is incredible. And in the third quarter, what's to say? I mean, it was that momentum and that blitz football, that sort of wave running that I was talking about a few weeks ago, when you've got multiple players at the contest that spits out. And, they've developed such great skills to keep the ball moving forward in tight. They do it, Bulldogs are very similar, but Melbourne have sort of perfected a model where, where they move it along the boundary line, and often with a handball, they must practice it a lot, but a handball high that the player can run onto because he's really good at it. And
Langdon does it to players,
Yeah, and they did one right near the end of the game. They did one where I think it was Gus handballed high over the top to Hibbert along the boundary line, and it's just sort of, it feels like they're on a high, on a tightrope, and they get it out. Once they get it out into space, they just spread, and they've got so many options. And when you watch it on the replay after the emotion, I've watched the replay twice, is you can take the time to look at that spread on the big telly that I've got out in my viewing room. And you can see them spread sort of open up, and it gives the player who's got the ball, ends up with the ball, so many options. So, we were just on top of them. And again, it makes such a big difference when you take your chances. And when we stopped taking our chances was when they got back into the game, because in that second quarter, I should say, in that third quarter, we never gave them that look in, did we? They didn't score a goal in that quarter. They didn't look like scoring a goal in that quarter. One of the takeaways from round 23 that I just think no one in the commentary, the footy media world, made enough of this, is they only scored 2 goals in the second half of that game. They only scored a goal in the second half of this game, and they never looked like scoring in that quarter. It was a momentum. They had no ability to arrest that momentum back from us. And the other thing that was pure was, we've talked all season about this sort of centre clearances, and this was one for the true believers in the clearances don't mean jack, because they beat us by 4, I think, in centre clearances for the game, and we scored 101 points from not centre clearances, but from clearances full stop, which was phenomenal. And, I'd love to know how many of them came in that third quarter. I don't know off the top of my head, but, so many of them were clean from the centre. We were just, the 2 of the first 3 goals were from centre bounce clearances. And as George noted before, was getting that space out the front of the contest. And one of the things that we talked about was, tactically, did Goody have a few things up his sleeve? And he 100% did. Is not once did they get out the front of the contest, maybe once for the whole game in the centre clearances. We must have happened 7, 8 times, one of which was one of the greatest goals I can recall. That goal from Maxi, he looked like a 6 foot, he looked like Jack Watts running at the goal. The way he kicked it, he flushed it beautifully. And it was a nice symmetry. The commentators said, oh, no one does that. Well, he did that, remember, the first time we played the Cats, not quite from running through the centre, but it was as far. He kicked it from inside the square from memory.
Yep, it was the corner of the square.
Yeah, so it was as a completer quarter. It was just a team that we had the momentum, the wave. We were blitzing, running in. Everything was coming off, and it led by Maxi, who was just completely in the zone. He looked really relaxed before the game. I don't know if you remember, but he's sort of that energy, positive energy. They were laughing as they were running onto the ground. He was standing in the middle with Yeah, with the players running past him, high-fiving him. And so not only was it a phenomenal individual game right across, but the quarter, it was what wonderful leadership. I mean, he was such a good captain in that game. We went in, 11-minute mark. We'd gone inside 55 times and scored a goal on each occasion. It was, we went in 5 times, bang, 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 5 goals. That's completely, blitzkrieg. So it was just a remarkable quarter of footy. And then they took Steve May off, I think, didn't they, George? About the sort of 20-minute mark. And that
late in the quarter, yeah.
And I reckon that, so one, it was great that he got through. 2, what's interesting in terms of the whole match, including that third quarter, is May really didn't do anything. He was sort of just like he was on old man's duty. He was running around. I think he was on Rowan for a bit of the time and, moving around. They just couldn't get anything going. And a couple of highlights in there. For me, I loved it. Our kicking efficiency was just brilliant. It was off the charts. We were 75% halfway through that quarter. Geelong were 38%. One, we were kicking well, multiple options. They were choosing well, but their disposal efficiency was a function of just the pressure that George noted, that they were constantly under every possession.
Like Tui, who's usually a very good kick, couldn't hit a target. That Henry, who's a very good mark, he was dropping marks.
Well, they were totally rattled, and you could see in the late in the game, even near the late, they were in that classic thing with that referred pressure where you can just see they're not, they're just worried about what's coming. Just brief, a couple of other things that sort of jumped out was we were just smashing them in clearances, obviously. We kicked 75. By halfway through that quarter, we'd already kicked 75 points from clearances. So the season high for up into this game for clearances was 76 points from a full game, and that was the Bulldogs. By halfway through by the 15-minute mark of the third quarter, we'd already scored 75 points from clearances. We went on to score another 26, but the damage was done by that stage. Led by Maxi, but it wasn't just Maxi, was it? It was just the whole team. So it was, just a phenomenal match. And then at the end of the quarter, Rowan came off, and I reckon he was probably better off coming off for the Cats because he had done basically nothing up until that point. He'd be completely blanketed. So, and Stephen May came off and Jordan came on. So the personal highlight for the match, for the quarter, I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying it was where Fritsch got his goal where there was a 50 metre. Was that in the third quarter?
Yep. I was just going to mention that.
After, I just love this vision of like a 12-year-old boy whose voice hadn't broken yet. He dived.
And the nerve of him, of all people, to accuse someone of diving. Give me a break. And Amdam Demon has in the chat room has said that Selwood losing his cool, and then straight at the next bounce, that was when Max Petrarca got it off to Max. But if you rewatch and have a look at the bounce, one of the Geelong players, I don't know if it was Dangerfield, Selwood should have been manning Petrarca, and he didn't go to him, and I think one of the players pushed him to go to Petrarca, and he still was a bit angry, so he wasn't totally manning him up, and that's when Petrarca took the ball away and ended up getting it to Max.
For the Titanic moment.
Yeah.
And Amdam Demon also notes that Petrarca was massive, and he's right, and I meant to say that, is that not only was he massive for the full first half, he was, I thought, probably take out Max, he was the best player on the ground, perhaps the most influential. Well, it's hard to go past Max, but also hard to go past Jack as well. So, it's easy to forget that. But Track has become, like, I wonder how they plan around him, because it's interesting how he sets up. Often when the ball's in transition, he sets up ahead of the ball, but in an aggressive place in the corridor. He either moves to the wing and there's a really good, strong marking option, very rarely outmarked, or stays in that centre corridor and he's an option. Either he pushes forward if it doesn't come to him, or he does get the ball. And so often he's a link in that scoring chain. If he has a good look, he'll go inside, as he did the first play the first goal we got to Brown. And if he doesn't, he'll set someone else up he'll often kick sort of on the diagonal, or that was him at his best in terms of the way he corrals the team and directs the scoring. I thought he was incredibly impressive. I just wish he could kick accurately for goal and he'd be the full package. But I thought it was a terrific game, and he was a huge factor in how we scored in that quarter and how effective we were at transitioning the ball. And we were dynamite off the half-back flank. They were pulled completely out of shape. And Track he's just brilliant at taking advantage of the team who has been pulled out of shape. His decision-making under pressure is as good as anyone in the game. And the other thing that's phenomenal about him is, and he uses it, and the commentators were saying it, is his ability to walk through tackles, which, again, everyone was talking about. David King was talking about the physical strength of the Cats team. I mean, it just showed up what a nonsense that is when you compare him to Track and Oliver, and in particular Track. He had 2-3 people tackling him at some time at points, and he would walk through and still get the handball off. He had a phenomenal first half, had a phenomenal game, but he was really influential in how we scored in that first half.
It was incredible, wasn't it? Even in that first quarter where he ripped the ball out of Radagalia's arms. Radagalia is no small bloke by any stretch.
Someone called Triple O because he just stole that ball.
Boom, boom. I had to watch that a few times because it's not immediately evident how he ends up with the ball.
He ripped it out of his hands. They just ripped it.
Yeah. A lot of Melbourne players are really good at getting the ball off under pressure and being tackled. And the Harmsy was really good at it. They must practice this as well. Obviously they practice all of these things. But how often do they get the little kick so that they don't, they don't give up a free kick, or they get that late handball? And while I think of it, the other thing that was good, I thought the umpiring was excellent. And I don't mind that not paying the dropping the ball when they consistently don't. And when you get a game as well umpired as that, you have to work super hard for dropping the ball. If that's going to be, I
hope they do that for the grand final, because we're coming up against a team that gets the rub of the green from the umpires. They didn't this week, but put the whistles away. Is my call.
Yeah, I reckon. Pay them if they're there.
If they're there, yeah.
That's the thing. I thought
but not frivolous.
Just
guy gets tackled and straight out dropping the ball. Come on.
Yeah.
Just another stat. Markman on Twitter noted today that Melbourne have kicked 19 goals 9 to Geelong 3 goals 8 in the second halves of the preliminary final and round 23. So 19 goals 9 to 3-8 in second halves. Against Geelong.
There was another stat that I read. We at half time there were 35 clearances. We'd scored from 18 of them, and the competition average from scoring from clearances for over the whole season from all teams is 23%. Over 50% of our clearances resulted in a score, either a point or a goal. That is toweling up another team, isn't it?
Absolutely. George, fourth quarter, a bit of preservation mode in terms of us resting players. It didn't mean that players weren't giving it their all. The players still on the field. There were a few times I saw our players get angry at themselves or go that extra inch to affect a tackle or a spoil or a smother. And for a team that is 80 points up and just trying to get through the match unscathed and has every right to ease up, they're great signs. When you're going into a grand final. This team really, really wants to win, and it doesn't matter how far up you are. They just want to keep going and winning. George, anything? Take us through that final quarter. Look, obviously there wasn't as glorious as the third, but this quarter once again featured a star-studded All-Australian bench for the last X amount of minutes.
Yeah, it's a pretty hard act to follow after that third quarter, and starting the quarter with a 78-point lead. Melbourne would have had all excuses to put the cues in the racks from an early stage, but that wasn't actually the case. They'd taken May off the ground for very obvious reasons and brought Jordan on. But I thought we got off to a great start in the quarter, because you're thinking, they'll just go through the motions in this quarter, and Harms rips out an absolute screamer of a mark over the top of Henderson just to start it off. Salem then drills a ball through about half a dozen Geelong players to hit Max on the chest for his potentially his 6th goal for the game, but unfortunately kicked it out of bounds on the full. But again, the pressure and the turnovers just kept on coming. They just wouldn't give them anything at all. Jackson came in with another screamer down the wing. Bowie was just impressive. Again, that back line, we'll talk more about the defence a little bit later on, but there was a series of actions where he missed the first one, tackled the second, tackled the third. It was just repeat effort after repeat effort, and it was coming from this back line. Hawkins and Cameron at one stage had the ball bouncing around in the goal square, and they just couldn't score because the backmen just would not allow them to score anything and just walk the ball out in the end. It was just incredible. Normally you expect one of those players to be able to get a boot to it or certainly score something or the other, but they just refused. Lever, I remember at one stage, was furious with himself that he
didn't take a mark.
Didn't take a mark and allowed his opponent a chance. But that's the ruthless and stingy nature of this defensive team that we've got operating. And we've talked about the team as a whole, but the defensive team is operating almost like a separate entity amongst this. Their KPIs seem to be set by themselves, and they just refuse to allow the opposition anything. So, finally, the state, it was interesting that in that last quarter with about 10 minutes to go, the crowd started a Mexican wave instead of booing. So that would have been the first time that Optus Stadium's had that scenario to be seen. Pickett snapped a goal at one point to give us an 83-point lead, and Fritter finally got another one to give us an 89-point lead. But with six minutes to go, we had 5 All-Australians sitting on the bench. It was just an incredible sight.
One more than the previous final, huh? Because May was subbed out at that point.
That's right, yeah. He's sitting at the back and four other All-Australians sitting in front of him. The Cats finally managed to get their first goal of the second half with 1 minute and 30 seconds to go.
Rivers was dirty. Again.
Yeah.
It just showed exactly what you mean with Levers sort of dirty in the third quarter when he dropped the what mark that he should have got. Just they're obviously so focused on refusing to let the opposition score. It's just bananas.
Yeah. No, it was a completely emphatic display by the team, and we can be very proud of them the way they're going.
What I also wanted to add is the All-Australian bench. Our 2 All-Australian backmen were off, while you've still got 2 very, very good forwards in the game, and it just showed. And that also, Petty, I think, was a good choice to go to Hawkins, and I thought did a really great job for the entire game, and I've got every confidence in him as a defender. Not that I didn't have that before, but it's just solidified that. B-Man, you had some more stats you wanted to reel off, some interesting stuff from the...
Yeah, just I won't belabor the point again, and sort of at the risk of death by statistics. There were some really curious stats in the game that at least I thought were curious in terms of difference. And before I'll go through a couple of them. Before I do, just picking up George's point about how ruthless our defensive unit is, and it's a really good way of describing it, George. That it's almost a team within a team, isn't it? It's like a unit within a broader unit. In the last 6 weeks, it's all about getting ready for this. For the grand final, for the prelim and the grand final. They're the 2 times you want to be at your peak. And in the last 6 weeks, opposition score per inside 50, we're number 1. Defending ball movement in the AFL, meaning that defending ball movement from the defensive half to the opposition's forward, we're number 1. Midfield intercepts, we're number 1. Pressure ranking, we're number 1. We're the number 1 ranked team without the footy. I just think that's sort of indicative of the whole team has been geared up that way. that's their number one thing first. They try to lock away. This is what we build our game around. I think it's our major strength. It probably goes without saying. But it's not just a defense. It's the key is we launch our offense. Those two things are connected. So it's not just sort of how Malthouse might have coached, or Ruse or Lyon, where you keep the opposition to a low score and then you beat them because of that. We do that and generate our offensive scoring from that. So I love those two connections, the way that they come together. The stats that I found curious was really there was lots of unusual things about that game and how it looked for us. And the obvious one was 101 points from stoppages to 19. We outscored them by 80. I mean, that's the game there. That's the margin. 82. What's that? 83-point differential in stoppages. We're not. No, we're 5th, 6th, 7th on the AFL table for scores from stoppages. We're coming up against the team that's number one is, I think they were number one for a long time, the Dogs, then Lions, so they might be back, 1, 2, up around there. We generate most of our scores from turnovers, and we only got 19 points from turnovers in this game. So that was really unusual, and it shows me that, tells me a couple of things. One, that pressure, but it speaks to what I was saying, that, Goody's kept his powder dry and he's not using up all his tricks until the time to use it, which is right now. And I think, all of the critique around Gawn, does he get value? Hits to advantage isn't as good. At one point, it was 25 hit outs, 7 of which were to advantage, or 6. It ended up being 33-7, I think. So he was really effective in his hit out to advantage, and hence a lot of those plays where we got out the front. So only 19 points from turnovers. I don't know for sure, but I reckon that's probably a season low. We had 30 more contested possessions than them, which was the game in a nutshell, basically, very similar to what the Dogs did to Port. 47 more kicks was really interesting. Much of them probably were in the last quarter when we're kicking around, but if we talk about 2 game plans, they're a team who would normally get 30, 40 more kicks than the Cats, and we had 47 more kicks than them. And we only had 13 more inside 50s. I guess that's a lot, but we had, was it 20 more against Brisbane or something like that? More hard ball gets. But the other one that really jumped out that I thought was curious, we only had 13 intercept marks, and so much talk about the influence of Lever and that you've got to shut him down, and that's so critical to shut him down. 13, I mean, that's his average. I forget isn't he averaging something like 8 intercept?
7 or 8.
Yeah. 7, 8 mark. Well, we only had 13 for the team. And so again, for me, that's really worrying stat if I was the Bulldogs, because the argument has been you take that away from Melbourne, then Melbourne are going to struggle. Well, we only had 13 for the match and we won by 80-odd points. I thought that was critical. The other one was ground ball gets, which is obviously something, 121 to 91, which is obviously something that we did well and will look to do well again. The other one was oppositions. They only scored 35% inside 50. That was what we had, our average, which is the lowest ever since they've collected that stat. In this game, they only scored 24% of the time they went inside 50, which is just a blanket defensive effort. So, I just thought some of those stats were really curious in the sense of they were sort of different. They're outliers. That's not how we normally play, and it suggests to me that Goodwin's added some layers to the game plan that he's now choosing, and maybe this 2 weeks in Perth have been, they've had a good opportunity to practice some of them away from prying eyes, away from video, away from, and particularly the centre clearance thing. And just finally, the thing that I was really interested in, some of the footage from Joondalup, was they framed it like they were mucking around and it looked like one of their days off, but they were flipping a football up in a one of those spinning wheel things, that you can put a gridiron ball in, or a cricket ball or whatever. But have you noticed how high they often kick it deliberately? And we got a goal from one where I think it was Sparrow kicked it high, the one that Cozzy marked in the goal square. It was sitting up so high for so long. He read it so well. And they when in doubt, they kick high, and a bunch of the ones that Brown marked or got to or brought to ground were exactly that scenario. And I think it's their attention to detail is really phenomenal. And I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever that whilst Richardson talked about that was a game they were playing, there's no question in my mind line, they had that machine there to practice marking high balls that go up super high. And again, there's sort of that attention to detail that Goody and the whole team has got, but it's something we're definitely doing. So, yeah, I just thought some of those things were curious and for me, real positive signs.
It's an interesting comparison to where people were talking about Melbourne needing to lower their eyes going into the forward 50 a couple of years ago. And the presence of Ben Brown, I think, has completely changed the landscape for that. You can afford to go high when you've got someone like that sitting underneath a fair number of them. While Brown might not be kicking bags of goals, I think he has made a dramatic change to the way the whole forward line structures.
Yeah, and then key to that, isn't it, George, is winning those ground ball gets. And they just couldn't get them. Like, we're happy for it to hit the ground. They just couldn't take any intercept marks. They averaged 97 marks per game and only had 57. They just could not get hold of the footy. And I reckon of those 57, they probably had 15 of them were in the last quarter. And when it was hitting the ground, they just had no answer when it hit the ground. Spargo, Cozzy, the way all of the players push forward, they're just swarming on that contest, and I just think they're phenomenal with the way they do it. So they're more than happy for it to be dropped and come to ground, and it's predictable. And as you say, George, it's perfect for Brown because even when he gets up so high, when he's marking at the top, he's must be way over 7 foot. He's where he grabs it.
Those arms are so straight up. We've never had a forward like that for a long time. Just straight up. You're right. It's probably more than 7 feet up where he takes those marks.
His head's at 7 feet. I reckon there's another 2 or 3 on top of that. It was interesting when you're talking about stats there, and the marking. Henry only had 3 marks for the game. Henderson 2, Tui 4, although he was playing up the ground a lot more, and B-Claves 2. These are their intercept players from that back line, and grand total of 11 marks between the whole lot of them for the whole game. They just completely fell apart down the back.
Yeah.
How much stock do we put in this illness excuse that was trotted out after the game? Is this just excuses, or is it a real thing?
Oh, they were sick. They were really sick, Andy.
Sick of playing.
Do we know who was who was sick? Did they name names?
I've heard Hawkins.
Rowan must have been.
Guthrie. Rowan's been sick for a number of years now, though.
Yeah.
It's sort of a seasonal thing. Dangerfield must have been, I'm a bit worried for him because wasn't he apparently sick in the last quarter against Melbourne in round 23? So he's been sick now for weeks, the poor bugger. Jesus, he'll have to go to Mog Creek and sort of get his stuff together. Yeah. I don't know, who knows? They're ready to play. It's a game of footy. Give me a break. All of this. To be honest, I watched that presser. I don't know what you guys thought, and I like Scott's pressers, and I like him as a coach generally. But I don't know. It left a funny. I thought it was a bit of a weird thing. He came in and said, "Don't ask me a question yet. I've got a few things to say." And then sort of gave us a backhanded compliment about they knew this is coming for years. Well done, Melbourne. You've been building for years. Some things will come out. On one hand, I don't want to take anything away from Melbourne, but some things will come out. And presumably, when some things came out, it was that a few of the players had got bloody diarrhea for a few days. I mean, what? I was expecting some bombshell about maybe they all had COVID or something, or God knows what. And, it's like, who gives it? I thought that was in quite poor form from Brad Scott, to be honest.
I think he's under, certainly having just been belted in a preliminary final. One might start talking about this a little bit now, about Geelong's weaknesses.
You can go for it, George.
Yeah, having been belted in a preliminary final again, Geelong have been in 11 of the past 15 preliminary finals and have lost 9 of them. Then on top of the round 23 loss against us, that was absolutely deflating as far as they would have been concerned. And now they've come out and been belted by 80-odd points in this game. It wasn't surprising that Scott wouldn't have been very effusive, but I think Geelong everybody talks and all the media will talk about how old they are. I think one of their very fundamental problems is Cardinia Park with the size. We talked about it last week. There's 5,000 square metres less than what is at Optus Oval. And their game style that they've built is around Cardinia Park. And you can't blame them because, why wouldn't you? You've got a small, narrow ground that suits a chipping possession game, easy to get out of the centre and kick it to a great, probably one of the best forwards that has been around in the last 15 years or so. But the trouble is when you come to the final series, you run onto those bigger grounds, the older legs that get away with it at Geelong and where players would have perhaps retired a little bit earlier or a couple of years ago, they can get away with it at Geelong because they don't have to run so far. All of a sudden it gets exposed. And the tactic of, they try to switch, but the trouble is on those big grounds, it takes 2 kicks to get across to the other side of ground instead of 1. All of a sudden the defence and particularly the younger, harder running players can get across and they've gone nowhere. It just completely takes their game style away. So I think Geelong's got a lot of big questions to ask. They've got this ageing list with, I think it was 11 or 12 players over the age of 30 in this game.
11 over 30, nearly 3/4 of the team are above 27.
Yeah.
And add dysentery and arthritis into the mix, and yeah.
Yeah. And I think they only had 3 below the age of 23 or something like that. Things aren't looking good for Geelong. Look, they'll hang in and they'll do the same thing as what they did this year and every other year. They'll try and hang in there for another year and hope.
But they might not be so attractive as a destination.
Yeah, but they're not going to go any further. That was as good as that they could expect to go in this final series. They were in the top 3 during the whole season. They stayed there the whole season, and they still were found short by a long stretch when it came to those bigger grounds at the end of the year. So they've got a lot of questions to ask themselves.
And if they win the game around 23, they were ahead at the siren. Maxi misses that shot, and they finished top of the ladder. It wouldn't have changed what happened in the finals.
No.
So they would have gone through a full round, season of AFL footy, home and away, finished top of the ladder, win the minor premiership, and they still would have gone out in the same manner because. I totally agree, George, on the sort of impact of Cardinia. But for me, the ageing list is one thing. It's the game style. It's just simply, I put them, Brisbane and Port, for me, have all got, as you noted before, Georgia, sort of an old school game of footy, really, which is, of course, contested possession. Like that's every club in the AFL, you're looking to win contested possessions. I saw a stat about Port. When they win contested possessions, the last 31 times they've played, they've won 30 when they've won the contested possession count. So for them, it's a pretty simple metric. And the same goes for Brisbane. They look to win contested ball, but it's not contested ball in of itself. I mean, obviously we do too, but it's, clearances and stoppages, and it's that swarm, that's what brought Port a cropper, is the swarm that the Dogs did. And the Dogs really sort of ushered in this whole way of playing in 2016. They took the competition by surprise. The competition was largely playing that model of the Ports and not so much the Geelong with its particular thing, but Geelong is still very focused on winning the contest and contested players. So like someone like Dangerfield perfectly, and Selwood perfectly embody the way they like to play footy, walk out the front of contests. If you're playing the Suns, you'll get those sort of walk out of the contest all day, won't you? But the swarm that swarm style chaos that's been called, and it's was brought in by the Dogs in 2016, and let's face it, that's exactly the template that Richmond brought. The energy, not necessarily the game thing. They won 3 flags, and we're exactly copying that template. Of that sort of high energy, and the thing with the ageing list, it's hard to do that with older players because it's a ballistic style of football that's hard to do. But I think for me, it's less about the list, more about the game plan. But on that, they took a huge punt to get Cameron. Now, Cameron's a star. absolutely, no questions. But in all honesty, who would you rather at the moment, Cameron or Brown? Given the money they're paying Cameron, the critical thing about taking Cameron is they gave up 3 draft picks for him. They squandered all of the win that they got by trading Kelly back to West Coast. They got their high draft picks and they gave them up for Cameron. So, I mean, they've sold the farm essentially to win a flag this year. And as you're saying, George, they're no closer now than they were. And arguably, they probably missed their window, I would have thought.
But we say that every year with Geelong. We've been saying they're going to bottom out, and they keep coming back like cockroaches.
They keep coming back to it and lose to a prelim.
Yeah.
Is that
No. I'm not jealous of them, but I'm just saying I would love to see them bottom out. But that's my own personal preference.
Maybe not. I mean, that's the question. That's what's being debated at the moment. Would you like to see them? A lot of Geelong fans would like to see them bottom out because that's the only way you're going to top up and get your. I mean, look who we've got in our team. We've got Rivers, all those players we've talked about. Rivers, all that energy. Jordan, who couldn't get a go. He's Medi-sub. Sparrow, Jackson. We've brought in all of that energy and talent, and they're trading on 30-year-old pluses. In order to get that young talent in, you've got to bottom out, or at the very least, not trade away 3 of your draft picks for Jeremy Cameron.
North Melbourne tried that for 10 years, that scenario of never bottoming out, and it's only in the last 12 months they've gone exactly the opposite, back to the draft to try and get the talent into the side. But you just can't keep topping up, hoping that it's going to get better, because it actually doesn't get you through to the end. There's a difference between topping up to get it to a premiership as opposed to topping up replacing old players. I think Geelong have got to a horrible situation with just so many old players running around that's holding the team together. In 2 years, half that team won't be there. It's an incredible situation that they've forced themselves. And as Binman said, they've given up their 3 draft picks to get Cameron.
And on top of that, they've got players like, Holmes finally made it, but I don't know their list particularly well, but they've got young players who can't get a game because of these old fellas, So, if you compare again to Melbourne and the way Goodwin's gone about it, how quick was he to put in Spargo into the team? Spargo is 22 now or something? He's already paid...
Still 21, I think.
21, played 60 games or something of footy. Yeah. So people talk about 2018. He's had that experience already. Jackson's already, he's 40-odd games. Cozzy, he's getting games into those young players, exactly as we're talking about with Sparrow and Jordan. Manage them brilliantly. So no matter what happens, we've got 2 players who are going to be solid footballs, as you were saying a few weeks ago, George, for the next 5, 6, 7 years. That sort of player can't even get a game at Geelong yet.
In terms of our selection, we went with Jordan as the Medi-sub again. 6 weeks ago, Sparrow was Medi-sub, and wouldn't have dreamt of one replacing the other yet. Jordan was sort of ahead. Where do they stand now? It seems that Sparrow's sort of cemented his spot in the side. So,
I'm convinced it's because he's so strong. And finals, just looking at them together, he's physically stronger than Jordan. And I reckon, you come finals, prelim, the heat, that's what Goody wants. Jordan will get his time in the sun, that's for sure. And I think they've managed it really well. There's probably no question that it was going to be Jordan as the Medi-sub. I was hoping maybe for the romantic in me that Jones would be the Medi-sub for this game. And, but, it's a very good sign that I'm not on the coaching panel because, it would have won it. You don't want to take that risk and do something for the sake of, romanticism, even though by all accounts he's been training terrific and playing terrific, Jones. But, I think it's important also to stick with your investment in Jordan, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's slightly different players as well. Jordan plays perhaps a little bit on the more on the outside, but you're right about Sparrow's physical state. He's got those trunk-like legs that will hold up in finals, and I think you're right also that when it comes to finals, you're coming up against teams that have got 3, 4, 5 other strong midfielders. When you're playing the Suns, you're only going to get 1 or 2. But like we'll find out in this grand final, the Bulldogs midfield runs really deep. So Sparrow's gone in there. He's he's actually replaced James Harmes as the first go-to man in the middle. He's been doing that for the last 2 games. So you've got Petrarca, Oliver and Viney as your first one. Sparrow's the next one that comes in. And we don't lose anything.
He gives Viney a chop out, doesn't he? He's the defensive mid who comes in when you need Viney to take some time on the pines. So that's exactly right. And we didn't, interestingly, that I don't think that was the case in round 23. So that was another sort of switch up that Goody's done in the last few weeks. And he's got good numbers, and he's a beautiful kick, isn't he? So he got sort of smashed in that contest, and it was a bit unlucky, but that Geelong player complaining about, I don't know what he was talking about. But that kick got up, he must have been dazed a bit, but it went arrow straight.
Yeah, no, he's stood up exactly. You don't expect the young kids to perform as well as they have, perhaps. And if Sparrow hadn't, then Jordan would be back in the side. But Sparrow's exactly the player that we need at the moment. And like we said last week, he's been hiding there in plain sight. And people will, in a couple of years, will be going, where have you been keeping this guy? Because they don't realise how good he is already at this inside mid work. And that was also a big difference when... in this game, Geelong have got Dangerfield and Selwood and Guthrie, and they lost Parfitt. Their next man was Atkins, and we've got Sparrow coming against Atkins effectively, 1-for-1. They're not playing on each other necessarily, but our next best player is far superior to what they've been able to put up.
Yeah, and that's right. And then the other one, there are other ace in the pack that is strong in the contest. He's not really mid, but he sort of plays around stoppages a bit as Tui, and they were able to blanket him and not give him, a bit like the way we did against Brisbane, not give him any space to run into, and so just limited his impact. Atkins is one of my new least favourite players because he's carrying on all game. He's got the porn star Mo.
He was one of their better players, I thought, though.
But a good question when you're looking at those things, I reckon, is would he get a game in our team?
No.
And he wouldn't, would he?
No.
So they're, one of their starting mids almost, or, I think he was, I guess, coming in for, he's sort of playing a bit of the Parfitt role, I suspect. Wouldn't get a game in one of their starting mids wouldn't get a game in our team. So I think that sort of shows the relative strengths of our midfield for all of David King's talk about how super strong Geelong were.
Our other selection, we brought in Hibberd. Your thoughts on that? I'm not sure what Hunt's status was, whether he was fit, ready to go, but wasn't picked, or still we're waiting to see how he pulls up again. And I'm not sure, we won't talk about selection necessarily for the grand final, but what did you think of Hibberd coming in and his game?
I'll start off on this one. I thought Hibbert's game was one that you don't notice, in the sense that you don't notice Hibbert doing very much, but then the result is you don't notice Gary Rowan and you don't notice Cameron doing very much either. Because Hibbert and Salem, I think, were basically alternating in or around those two players. Rowan finished up with a grand total of 1 possession for the whole game. Cameron finished up with 4 or 5 total possessions. We needed an extra stronger body probably for Radikalia as well, and he did very little as well. 5 possessions total for the whole game. I thought he might be a bigger threat than that, but don't underestimate the work that Hibberd was doing to just nullify those players in the back line. And we talked about the team within a team. He did his job beautifully. I don't know. I think the selection committee's got a really horrible problem, but I think a lot depends on the opposition players and how they're going to match up with the Bulldogs forward line. We'll talk about that more next week when things become a little bit clearer. But is it going to be Hunt? Is it going to be Hibberd? Smith will be back in the possibilities as well, but he will have been out for 3 weeks. Normal return time for a hamstring. So, very difficult decisions to make. But the rest of the back line's holding up very, very well.
Well, we may as well talk defence now. George, you were going to look at them. How'd you see them?
Oh, it was just fantastic, right across the board. While Big Man said we didn't get many intercept marks, we actually had huge numbers of ground ball intercepts. Bowie, for example, five intercepts, Hibbert 4, Petty 7, Lever 7, Salem 7, May 3, even for his limited time on the ground, and Rivers 2. But it wasn't just the defensive efforts, and we saw a couple of times in the game they were just ruthless. There was it. I think it might have been in the second quarter. The ball was bouncing around in the Geelong goal square. Smith only had to get his boot to the ball. Hawkins is throwing his weight around, and there was just Melbourne player after Melbourne player threw themselves at the ball to deny them getting. I think they might have rushed through a point in the end or something like that, or it went out of bounds. Yeah, they were just ruthless. It was just incredible. The team operating as a team, and one of the guys would throw himself in, and then the next person would be prepared. Seeing that, would then follow up to help him out, and then the next one, and then the next one. It was just amazing what they were doing. Salem was, people watched the game that Max Gawn played. I reckon Salem was playing, or Petraka. I reckon Salem was playing as good a game off that back line as any others. He had 720 metres gained in this match. It was just enormous. I
didn't realise that's amazing. 720.
720 metres. And most of that's from kicking. It's not from running up the ground where Langdon gets his coverage from running halfway across the field all the time. But 720 metres going from Salem. The other incredible stat from the back line was Petty covered 14 kilometres.
Yeah, he was second on our behind Langdon.
Behind Langdon. It's just incredible. And, this is the best defensive unit in the league at the moment, when we talk about the Bulldogs next week, I think they've got a lot more to worry about than what we have in terms of being able to hold the forward line at bay. They've been stingy all year. They were stingy in this game. May went off. As we know, and I don't think that affected anything in the slightest. Petty stood up and did exactly what he needed to do to keep Hawkins under control. Hawkins kicked the grand total of 1 goal 2 for the night. Cameron managed 2 goals, separated by 97 minutes of play. But the pressure and the intense fortitude of the back line was just something to see. That it was as good a match that I've seen from any Melbourne defence ever. In this game from those, there's not going to be. It's going to be a really, really hard call for the selectors this week or next week to be able to take someone out of that, because there were no faults, there were no errors. They played brilliantly.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think I agree also that it's almost a flawless defensive game, and at least part of that is what you're saying, George. That sort of manic refusal to even concede a score. And that was right to the end of the game. So there was the example that you talked about, and I think that was in even the second quarter. There was another one where Hawkins was just completely flummoxed, and he kicked it across his body, and it still looked like they should have scored something, and we scored. And then right near the end of the game, where you think that you've already got your cue on the rack, is we just swarmed them and refused to give up a point at the end, and we sort of rushed it out. The other player, you're right on Salem, and I think that I'm probably guilty of underestimating Salem in a way which seems weird, but he's so effective, isn't he? And the other thing that the defensive unit does, and he's a real weapon when he does it. The goal that he set up for in the first quarter to Spargo was a classic Melbourne goal where we've got them squeezed right up, and under pressure they do the thing that you're coached, no doubt, never to do, which is to kick wildly out of your back half, and it lands straight to him, and he's so calm the way and he assesses his options. options. If you look at that replay, they spread like a scatter gun. As soon as that sort of goes, as soon as it's clear, it's coming to him, and he's got options in front of him. The other bit of play that I loved that he did was he sort of almost arrogant way he stood up at the tackle at the end in the last quarter and sort of assessed his options and kicked it inside. It just looked like a guy on top of his game, didn't it?
It was fantastic, wasn't it? The other interesting thing I think it's worthwhile remembering about Salem and also Viney is that 6 to 8 weeks ago, we were worried about Viney's foot and we were worried about Salem's groin. And that intervening period where we've had a couple of weeks rest effectively, I think has really put both of those players back into their best player mode. They're not carrying anything, and boy, both of them are lethal when they're at their best.
Yeah, really good point. And they didn't rush Viney back, and Salem was the only player they rested really all season, isn't he? The only one that he was arrested around that Dogs game. The other player that I thought, again, really good coaching from Goody, bringing Bowie in at that point in the season. He obviously brought him in with a clear mindset that he was going to be in our finals, best 22. You don't mix up make a decision like that without that being your plan. And he was a bit sort of quiet. You know, he took time to get his feet in the first final, but geez, he looked like a 100-game player in this one, didn't he? In the heat of 60,000 people, the crowd going bananas, and I just could have wept. The kick, that 40-metre drilling kick in the first quarter under pressure, hit, I can't recall who he hit on the wing, you know, who it was he spotted up on the wing, but it was just beautiful. It was exactly the sort of kick that, you know, I mean, Salem's obviously good, but you know, that drilling low, fast kick under pressure is exactly the sort of kick that we don't have that many players who can execute it. And that's exactly why he's in the team. And he's really surprisingly good one-on-one. A few times he halved contests where he was outpointed weight-wise against his opposition or whoever he was up against. Impressive young player, and he's, you know, that classic thing of good football. He's got time and space, but above all, he makes good decisions. So he's both a good kick combined with making good decisions. I thought he was terrific. Actually, he didn't get huge numbers, but barely made a mistake. So the other thing about the defensive unit, that Lepper on the commentary made one good comment, I thought, and immediately followed it up with a not so good comment. His good comment was how defensively important the work the players like Nibbler and even, you know, Brown, but Nibbler and A&B and the two wingers are in pushing up into our defence. I think that's really important in how often we win the ground ball, because you've got, and Gus as well, pushing up.
Spargo too.
Spargo, yeah, exactly. They're so, and I thought Fritsch was amazing in that way. He didn't really get much going score-wise early on, but he was so involved in the pressure and pushing up into the defensive line. And then the not so good comment that he made was in relation to Bowie, saying, it was really good bringing Bowie in because, you know, Melbourne's got a dour defence. And I was thinking I would have described Melbourne anything but a dour defence, as I was saying before. In fact, I would argue that our defence is as much as our forward line is a really important part of our defensive work, our defensive unit is really important in our scoring and the way we generate scores, and it's super exciting. I would say anything but dour. The risks we take when we move it, how we flip it around in the back half, you know, dour is Geelong, where you mark and hold it and look around, and that's dour. I just think they're so exciting to watch.
Someone on Demonland mentioned that the last time we played the Bulldogs, they put a lot of time into Salem. We didn't have Bowie in the team at that time. So if they're going to put time into Salem, we've got another very good kick coming out of the back line. We'll talk about that next week.
Chook in the chat room says Hibbert he likes in the back line, that you can trust him. He's a great ground level player, and there was a number of balls he really won. No way he goes out for the grand final. It'll be interesting. I'm not convinced. I just think he's perhaps a little bit slow across the ground, but Chook's right. He doesn't get beaten in one-on-one contests very often, does he?
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about the Bulldogs when the ball hits the ground in the forward line. I know we've been in their forward line. I know we've been saying we've been good in the back line, but that's a bit of my worry. They don't have the tall timber, and I guess we'll talk. This is what we'll talk about next week. But yeah.
No, I think whenever you think that thought for the next 2 weeks or anything similar, Andy, my advice is to flip it and say they've got to worry about us, because still there's this talk about things like that. We've got now the best, statistically over the last 6 weeks, we're the best clearance team in the AFL, not them. We're scoring we're averaging over 100 in that block of times. 3 times now we've scored over 100. We've got the potent forward line, not them. I think all of those things that other teams' strengths we've got in spades, and no one's got our strength, our one wood, which is our defence.
And the other difference, Andy, is we'll probably put someone on people like Mitch Hannon. We'll probably put someone on Bailey Smith, unlike what Port Adelaide did.
Yeah, I think we've got to put some. We're going into territory we're not meant to be talking about, but it's very hard not to, because that's all that's on my mind. I might get you guys to record some affirmations about the Melbourne Football Club for me, so I can put them on while I sleep. B-Man, let's talk about the midfield.
Yeah, we probably talked a fair bit about.
Yeah, it's just you can just add some individual efforts. We haven't really talked Oliver or.
I just thought, as I said before, it was just a awesome game from the midfield right across the board. I really am convinced that they've kept a lot in their that a lot of set plays from the centre that they've kept under wraps, and they've released them now because, there's a number of other things too, like they're kicking more often to the corridor when they're bringing it in for a kick inside 50, but really around the stoppages, so some of their setups, why would you practice them in the home and away? You want to bring them out, the way that footy is, you want to be at your best at prelim. And then you get to win the prelim, you stay at that level the next week. It's exactly what happened. And it was like they were just itching to get those things working. I mean, 101 points from clearances is phenomenal. Like as I said, everyone talks about how good the Dogs are in that way. They had the previous high, which was 77. I mean, and that's in a home and away game. And I forget who it was against, but I don't know who it was against. But it's probably against someone like the Saints when they beat them by 120 points or whatever. Yeah. We did this in a prelim final against arguably the third or fourth best midfield in the AFL. I say arguably because I don't reckon it's true, but that by any measure, that's a midfield that's humming. And there's sort of chemistry between Gawn and all three of the starting mids is second to none. I thought you cannot underestimate the importance of Viney. He was unbelievable, that defensive mid-roll, but I think Demon Trucker mentioned last week how much better his decision-making with his kicking going forward are, and I think that was really on display as well. So he was a lot more damaging with his possessions and tackles to hurt on top of all of that. There was a bit of play that they highlighted on one of the shows, maybe it was Fox after the game, that was really clever, where they had Selwood was pretty much manning for the first 3 quarters until they released him from him, Oliver. So Oliver had a relatively quiet night, but it was still damaging. Selwood had no impact whatsoever. So that's the risk you take of, putting one of your best to try and nullify one of our best. Where he split, where between him and Petrarca, he got caught in no man's land and ended up going to Petrarca. Petrarca sent Oliver across to, I think, Menegola or another player. It split that combination up. That was it. We got a goal from that when Jackson flipped it out and we got an inside 50. That sort of chemistry and the way they're working and, is really, they're really working well together. And the other thing I've again, it's a basketball thing, George, is how often they do little taps to each other, like sort of tap it down, or it's, they must practice it a lot. So they've really got good synergy. On top of all of that, they've got the best ruckman. I heard someone on the radio this morning compare him to Gawn to Simon Madden, and I hadn't heard that comparison before, and I actually reckon it's a really good comparison. So someone who's athletic, can mark, can go forward, is smart the way he uses the ball, but that he's just dominant, isn't he? And I wonder whether Stanley's probably the only player in the AFL he's probably got the athleticism at the moment to go with him. So I wonder, how well their defence, well their rucks are going to go. And again, we'll talk about this next week. So yeah, I think the mids are in awesome shape. I agree with what George is saying. It's Sparrow, Captain Jack's come in to take that role rather than Harms, and I think it works. Harms, it frees him up to be. He still takes the sort of round the ground stoppages. He played a great game as well. But that starting midfield in the middle of Petrarca, Viney, and Oliver and Gawn is just total A grade, isn't it? And it's going to take us a long way over the next few years.
It'll be interesting to hear what your thoughts are next week in terms of whether we bring that extra man to the stoppage against the Bulldogs. So bookmark that question for next week. Forwards, I was wrapped with our forwards. You have a look at marks that we took for the game. And our three leading mark getters were Bailey Fritsch, Charlie Spargo and Ben Brown with 8, 8 and 7 marks. Ben Brown, what an addition to the team he's been. Just absolutely fantastic. Though we were talking about before, that reach of his arms when they're fully extended, just fantastic. And his marks sort of that he takes sort of on the half forward line or just on the 50 line or just out or a little bit up the wing. His work rate is incredible. So I really love that aspect of his game. Kicked 2 goals too. Would have obviously want to. I'm waiting for him to kick that bag of goals. Hopefully he does it. Hopefully he does it next week. A 4 or 5 goal will be just sweet. But still, that contribution of 2, 3 goals is fantastic. Just what we need. Fritsch was a little bit quiet, but as you said, did some work up the ground and still kicked his 2 goals. Charlie Spargo is just getting in amongst it, kicking goals. He's had more possessions this week. He's had 18. And Cozzy, how can we go past that little live wire? It's all I ask of forwards, small forwards, and that's to kick goals. Didn't have high possessions, only the 13. But when you kick 3 goals, it doesn't matter. That's what he's there for. Tom McDonald, after the quiet week of four possessions and 6 possessions, it was nice to see him up that to 14. He's taken the 5 marks. He's kicked that goal. It was a beautiful snap, and takes a good defender away from Ben Brown, because if you take Tom McDonald out of that team, you're leaving Ben Brown to be double teamed, and we just don't want that to happen. So that's and look, our ruckman kicks 5 goals. That certainly goes a long way to help the situation. Anything you guys want to add about our forward line?
What does Nibbler have to do to get
I
run in your forward line?
Because you know what? He doesn't. He does a lot around the ground as part of the midfield. He's taking a lot of. Also, he's going to a lot of the stoppages as well, and not just in the forward line. He's up on the back flank at stoppages during the match. He's not just a forward or a half forward flank. I think he does a lot of work in the midfield, and probably should have been talked about in the midfield, big man.
Yeah, no, he's certainly. Fair enough. All right, but we're given the fact he's a forward, but he had 10 contested possessions for the night. Yeah. And, I guess almost everyone had, I think probably the lowest was, actually interesting, I'm just looking at it now, Gus only had 2 and Captain Jack Sparrow only had 3, when I say only. But yeah, no, he's making good decisions, Nibbler, isn't he? Yeah. And as you say, of course, he's important the way he gets up and down the ground, and he did take a few round the ground stoppages as well. I wouldn't say he's a mid though. No.
But he is taking a lot. They've slowly over the year he's been taking more and more of that midfield role around the ground.
And it was a very clever and important goal that he kicked early on, just to keep that momentum going. And he really gets up, around the other players, and his energy is super, I reckon. Sorry, George.
Yeah, we need to introduce another segment in, not just forwards, mids and backs, about what we'll call the also-rans at this stage. We don't talk about Gus, we don't talk about Langdon.
Well, that's
Langdon we don't talk about Nibbler.
Langdon was fantastic as well, and also not high possession, but he's running, and we say it, I've been saying all year, he just gets into position.
He's a mid.
Yeah.
So he's running phenomenal, wasn't it?
We'll talk more about them next week, perhaps. We'll give them their own segment.
Yeah.
Well, if we win a grand final, we'll go through each player individually.
Yeah. It's going to be a 3 or 4 hour session, people out there, so be ready for it. The only other thing about the forwards I'd add is that, again, when we get to the game against the Dogs, they're going to have real trouble handling us. Of our first 9 goals, we had 8 different goal kickers. And Spargo had kicked 2. And I think that's the danger for the opposition. We just don't have a typical forward line in one sense that they're not all the same type of players. They are so different. Cozzie's not the same small forward as what Spargo is. Spargo's much more measured and much more decisive. Cozzie's a live wire that just sparks up there. T-Mac does all the grunt work. Brown's the big, tall target. You've got all these players contributing in different ways, and it's very, very hard for the opposition to come up with matches against those type of players. They might get 1, they might get 2, but they'll really struggle to come up with a true match. And Geelong certainly did in this game. They not only were they taken apart their defence, they just couldn't match up on us at all. And it wasn't surprising how open and free our forward line looked. With those quality players that we got running around in there at the moment.
I think that's a good point. And if you compare us to Geelong again, is when it was like I was saying about Hawkins last week, if he's not kicking goals, he's not offering that much to the footy team. Whereas it's just not true of our players. T-Mac kicked 1? He still offered heaps. Structurally it's important. He takes it big. He brings it to the ground.
Brings it to the ground, yeah.
Exactly. They get no intercept marks. Cozzy, kick 3, but even if you'd only kick the 1 or none, his defensive pressure, you can't, where do you put it's very unpredictable, you say, George. The other thing too is that it's really, again, because the way we swarm the ball in that blitz style of football and move the ball in waves, we get our goals with the players running back to the goals, where we kick it over the top. So even our very first goal was a classic example of that. We're up relatively high, we get the ball out the front, we're moving it, and then we kick it over the back, and we're running onto the ball. That's really hard to stop when you get, because it stretches the opposition defence and they're all over the side. It's much easier if you can one-on-one, like the way that GWS were trying to defend against the Cats, where you create lots of one-on-ones and, you bring it in a market. But when, if you look at the sort of down the ground shot they show on some of the footy shows, Melbourne players are running in all sorts of directions. You've got the wingers running in. There's options everywhere when we're swarming, which brings all of those players into the game that you were just mentioning, George. The Bailey Fritsch is suddenly there, or Brown's out there on a lead, or you've got your mids pushing into that space as well. Really it's about them often taking the right option. When we're on top of teams, we've got so many options we can give it to. You've got Langdon running into that space as well. So really exciting to watch. And I think you're right, George, that creates a real, headache for the opposition in terms of how do you manage that ball movement at the same time as working out, that's not a normal way of defending. Normal, it's, one-on-one, you match them up and you stick with them. Well, if you're swarming in there and you've got someone like a Clayton Oliver or a Jack Viney running into the forward 50, that's not a defense. Who mans that player? So I think it creates a lot of challenge, and you can see that in our scoring. As I said, we're averaging north of 100 points in our last 6 games. We've won 6 games now on the trot. We're becoming an offensively, we're scoring and defending. So that's a really difficult combination for the opposition.
The Port Bulldogs game. I was a bit disappointed with the result. I thought going into the game, I thought Port would win. I mean, not because I think they've been impressive this year. I just thought the journey that the Bulldogs have done, and no doubt they're going to talk about how hard the Bulldogs have done it, and they're going to be the story of, they do it hard, the boys from the West. They weren't allowed to train. They've gone all over the country. Anyway, I thought that would hamper them. I thought Port being at home, having that home crowd advantage, that they would they'd have the Bulldogs measure. And then for us, that would be a good thing going into a grand final. I thought we can do to Port what we did to Geelong. Bulldogs, I'm not that confident that we can do that with, although having listened to you, Big Man, tonight, I'm starting to get some confidence back, but no doubt this time tomorrow it'll be gone. You want to talk about a little bit about the Bulldogs game, Bulldogs-Port game, not try and keep it brief.
Yeah, I'll go first just quickly. I thought Port was super disappointing. It's, if you look at a Melbourne lens, the difficulty of for Melbourne and Port both face were having that 2-week break. There's always a challenge, isn't it? Because particularly more so for Melbourne, because we're outside of, we're in a hub over in Perth and our systems are different and all of that stuff. It's always sort of, I guess, there's a challenge of being ready because you've had your momentum stopped and, you're coming in. But Port were pretty much it was, I think, plus 23 contested possessions for the Dogs at the end of the first quarter. That was pretty much the margin. For me, that first quarter was it. The game was over. And they couldn't ever recover their balance after that, Port. They didn't, it's a cliche, but they didn't come to play. And that was evident right from the beginning. I said before we started the show, this might be confirmation bias on my part, but there's been lots of comparisons made between the two games and the margin is similar and people have been pumping up the Bulldogs. But I think our performance was much stronger because the Cats, despite all I was saying about them, sort of their game plan, their effort was still good, and that on that pressure meter that they have was 187 to 177, the average across the game. So that indicates the Cats were there and thereabouts pressure-wise. And then, as I said, the numbers were not, the numbers in the Brisbane Melbourne game were much more out of whack than the Geelong Cats game, despite the margin. I just didn't think that Port brought anywhere near the intensity they needed to bring, and they made some clangers. And then, so they're much vaunted younger players like Rosie, and there are a number of players who pulled up short, to be honest, of contests. And, for a team that prides itself on the contest, they would have been gutted. Like the fans would have been gutted. The club will be gutted. There'll be some big questions asked of a lot of their players. And I thought one of their players that I've sort of had a bit of a knock on that I actually thought was really good was Marshall. And if Marshall is the one standing up for them physically, when you've got Dixon and all of, Latham and all of the bigs, you're in trouble. And I don't know about you, George and Annie, but I just didn't think Port brought the energy you need to be bringing for a prelim, and never really could get it back. There was a little minute there or two where it looked like they might have got moving, but they got swarmed, that energy, by the Bulldogs, and the Bulldogs were impressive. There's no question about that. But again, what will stop the Bulldogs is that pressure means that each of those little flippy handballs that each of them are an opportunity for the chain to break, and Port can never put enough pressure on them to break that chain. And so they were able to move the ball at will in the way that they love to do it off the halfback flank, and move it super quick and transition it super quick. And with Martin in, they also finally got on top in the sort of clearances and stoppages. So Port weren't very impressive. Dogs were terrific, but it's easy to sort of rate them. I suspect you also got to look at who's Port beaten. They got over Geelong. That was relatively impressive, but Geelong was super flat coming off the game that they played against us. They only just beat Bulldogs at the round 23 in a pretty scrappy game. So that, their form is not phenomenal, Port's, and I think it showed.
I was of a similar mind. I was singly unimpressed with the coaching. I'm not a fan of Ken Hinkley by any stretch of the imagination. I think they've got one game plan fundamentally, and that's contest and kick the ball to Charlie. And that's even worse than what it sounds, because they genuinely do only kick it to Charlie. They never kick it to anybody else in their forward line, no matter how free they are. their first big mistake was in the very first quarter when they had Drew sitting on the bench, who's their best tagger, and
beggars belief, that decision.
Just unbelievable. Left Liberatore all on his own in the middle. Liberatore had 7 possessions in the first quarter, and I'm sure all of them finished up in a score for the Bulldogs. When they finally put Drew on him just short of quarter time, Liberatore had 10 possessions for the whole rest of the match. But as Bin Man just said, the game was already over by that stage. It was completely shot. Shaki on Aliir was a brilliant move by Beveridge, but Hinkley didn't do anything about it. He just left him there for the whole game. I've got no time for Shaki. He's not physically strong. He's not a natural forward that I can see. But surely you'd move either Jonas back into a similar role or move them around or something like that, because the Bulldogs only you've got those 2 tall forwards, but you've got to move something. The commentators post the match in particular highlighted Hannon and Bailey Smith, how they were allowed to run from the middle of the field on a number of occasions, and not a single Port player followed them. It was just incredible. That simply won't happen when they come up against us. Boak and Wines in the middle looked exactly like they were a 33-year-old and a banged-up, very talented player in Wines, but none of, like our game against Geelong, the possessions and the contested possessions, particularly in the middle, weren't effective because they're all coming out the wrong side of the centre circle. Port players were standing back watching others or expecting others to do the job. Saw that plenty of times. Their forward line, I think Charlie Dixon kicked 1 goal. Fantasia, Rob Gray, Motlop were unsighted for the whole game. So we've got the is Goodwin the right man thread on our fan side. I don't know what the Port Adelaide fan side is, but surely there'll be one there. Is Hinkley the right man for the job?
Picking up a couple of those points, George, when we were previewing the Port Melbourne game a few weeks, but round 17, I think it was, we were talking about how critical it is to take the crowd out of the equation, because Port are a team that run on that, they really need their enthusiasm to get that energy of those playing, those sort of, which in a way that's how they generate a bit of that sort of blitz football. But it's not blitz football in the way that you've got 4 or 5 players attacking the ball, carrier, or, you're not running in waves. It's just sort of a whole bunch of exciting plays by individuals. Yeah. They need to be turbocharged by the crowd. That's when they're playing their best. They had that opportunity. Beveridge, it missed a motivation. He obviously would have been just ramming that home. So take the crowd out of the equation, take their energy out. And that's exactly what happened. And it felt like they had no energy. The crowd were completely and utterly silent at the end of that first quarter, couldn't get anything going. And it really felt like the Port then had nothing to draw on. There was one. The other thought was, I totally agree with the coaching. The 2 main ones that I thought were strange were Hannon allowing him so much space, and it was clearly a set player, and it was related to how they played Aliir and on Shaki on Aliir, because the commentators were saying it, but Shaki was bringing Aliir sort of back and then playing him from behind and sort of dragging Aliir into no man's land, and they were leaving big space in front of them, and Hannon was running from the wing and half forward into that space, and they were kicking it to him. And Melbourne do a little bit of the same thing. And funnily enough, we used Hannon in a similar way. But it was right from the get-go, I was saying, why has Hannon got so much space? It was as if they had decided not to man him up. And he kick 3 first half goals, didn't he?
Yeah, 4 in total, wasn't it? 3 or 4, yeah. Yeah, the same as Bailey Smith.
Yeah, and 2 of those in the first quarter were purely because he was able to run unchecked from the half-forward line into the side 50, which is just it's a complete defensive no-no. There's no way Melbourne would allow, that space to be run into, because the zone would have blocked that space up. That's what your point about the defence is old school, George, isn't it? There's no real zone in the way we set up a zone that moves across the ground if they transition. The other one was Aliir. I thought that was so strange the way that they didn't do anything to break that. Why didn't they put Aliir on Hannon, for instance? Like, then take Hannon to the ball, then at least give the opposite Beveridge something to think about. I mean, that's the problem with, and there'll be a lot of discussed in the next 2 weeks about this, and it's false economy, is this thing about comparison between Aliir and Lever. Oh, that's the blueprint to disrupt Lever. Well, the problem with that is, I don't know if you've noticed, but Lever's playing a lot more one-on-one now, for one thing. So he was manned up a lot of the time on Rowan when May went off, and at different times taking one-on-one. And if you hear Lever, he jokes about this, that May always says he's got to do his job on his man first before he goes off. So there's that. So he could have brought him on to, one of the tour. He could have gone to Norton. Why not Aliir on Norton? I just don't understand that, why you wouldn't do that. Then you force the opposition coach to change their plan, but they just let him go into no man's land. And the other thing that Aliir is really good at but didn't do in this match, and Lever's really good at, is he can leave Shaki. And, he can leave Shaki and go to the contest. And Aliir didn't. I thought it was really bizarre the way that they allowed Aliir to be taken out as a weapon. The problem for the Bulldogs with us is that you can do that, but we can just play Lever as a pure man-on-man. No worries. You put Shaki on him, then he'll play pure man-on-man, or Lever will just take Norton, for instance, or Lever will take Hannon or whatever. And we've still got Petty who can zone off and mark, and we've still got Hibbert who can zone off and mark. So, we're not, again, it's about sort of, they're one-dimensional up forward. As you've noted lots of times, George, it's all structured around Charlie Dixon, a bit like how Geelong structure around Hawkins, and it's one-dimensional down the back. It's all structured around how effective or otherwise Aliir can be. And that's a stupid system if you can dismantle a system by taking out one player at either end.
And that they did, and that's why they're not in a grand final this week, much to my disappointment. All right.
Yeah, and it's for that reason that I said last week that I would have preferred to play Port, because that system is not a premiership winning system, and Bulldogs they've proved it.
Certainly did. Well, let's move on as we're getting up to the 2-hour mark. Only other thing, two other things I want to talk about. Jonesy, his decision to go back home. He's got twins being born, I think, very shortly. Obviously, family comes first. He was probably told he's not a chance to play, and that's probably made the decision to go home easier for him. Whether or not he was going to always do that, I don't know. And I guess we may find out at some point. But yeah, I mean, I'm gutted for him, but family comes first. And it would have been a lovely fairy tale if he could have been the Medi sub, but we've got to go with the best team. How many chances do you get to play in a grand final? As I said at the top of the show, I've been waiting 44 years and we've made it 3 times. And this is perhaps the first time we're an actual genuine chance that we're not coming up against a Goliath of the competition. Not taking anything away from the Bulldogs, because I do think they're a very, very good team. But we match up very well against them. So you got to play the best team. Those opportunities don't always come. But, yeah, gutted for Jonesy. George?
Yeah, not much more to add to that. It would have been a fairy tale finish. I was wondering, though, whether Jones is actually being a bigger team man for the team than what is being portrayed even at the moment.
As in taking one for the team to take that emotion out of it.
That's exactly right, Andy. Yeah, whether he's good. Look, you're not going to. I don't want you to be making an
emotional decision. But
an emotional decision. I'm going to go home now, and you can put the best side on because I know that I'm not quite there. So that takes away one of the pressures. One of the pressures from the coaching team and also the side as well.
Jonesy's honourable, and he probably would do that. But I think the coaching staff are pretty professional, and I don't know if they would do that.
Yeah, we'll never know. We'll never know now. But he's been a great servant for the club. Hope he's got a couple of kids that are going to play for the
a boy
AFL.
And a girl. Of those
a boy and a girl will have both sides. Yep.
Well, he's already got a boy and a girl, so
So in about 16 or 17 years, we can thank him doubly.
Yeah, hopefully, maybe a bit quicker than Jonesy. No knock, Jonesy, if you're listening. I thought Yeah, I thought the club handled it super well. And Max Gawn was interviewed a few times. I've heard him. He'll be on RSN hopefully tomorrow.
He is on tomorrow,
well. It's every fortnight, but I'm wondering with now.
He is. I've seen them promoted on social media.
Great. Well, that'll be a must listen. That's terrific. 20-minute slot. He said that, the highlight for him, as much as that, he's doing it for the fans, the club's doing it for the fans, and the club's been brilliant at the messaging. I just could not be more impressed with how the players, the way they're talking about, the fans and the connection. But he pointed out the most special and the best part of the whole game for him was when all the players who weren't playing ran onto the ground, including Jonesy. And that was probably the time that I was most emotional, actually, to see all of those players, Bradkey and obviously Jones and Melksham and Tomlinson, who was distressed, wasn't he?
He was crying, yeah. Well, he knows that he would have been there.
He knows he would have been there, and in particular Jones, and how sort of enthusiastic Jones was and smiling. And I was like, that must be so hard for him, but his energy is so positive, and just to see that whole 44 players, embrace on the field. My MFCSS was going, oh no, I hope there's not a COVID breach there, and all 44 teams the players won't be able to play next week. But,
can you imagine that?
Fortunately, they were out of.
Then again. I saw the Bulldogs players, coaches, all hugging people in the crowds, and I was thinking, "Hey, AFL, look at this." But I don't think we can. I don't think it's a legitimate premiership if we win by default.
No. We have to play the boot starter.
I'd take it.
Yeah. No, we won't need it. But I thought that was a really nice touch from Maxi, and they've got such a positive, connected energy, haven't they? That team.
Yep, they certainly do. The other bit of good news that was announced is Jason Taylor, who has arguably been the architect, at least, of putting bringing the pieces of the puzzle onto the deck. He's had a fantastic few drafts. Going back to Spargo and Fritch's draft and Petty's draft. And then Jordan Sparrow, and we'll never know about Nietzsche. And then obviously the boys, the Cozzy, Rivers, Jackson, and Bowie as well. And from all reports, Laurie will be good too.
And Rosman.
Yeah, so Jason Taylor has extended his contract for they said a long-term contract, so fantastic.
It's so good, so good.
So important, isn't it? Because every other club knows exactly what he's done for us in the last couple of years, and they would be looking at nabbing him with the earliest opportunity. So,
and I'm sure he would have had some money thrown his way.
Yeah.
But it's so important. We identified areas where we needed to improve our game, particularly out of the draft. I'm not sure how much of a hand he has in terms of the trades and stuff like that for existing players from other teams. I don't think as much, but we sort of identified needs and we went out and found the best people for it. And you can see the fruits of that.
Totally. So and just on that was if history go back, it's funny to think it now, but there was a lot of debate about the decision to get your picks, for us to get our picks, to engineer getting Jackson and Cozzy. Cozzy, remember, people were talking about a late first round, early second round, and there was a lot of, what are Melbourne doing going small? And then there was even discussion about, well, why are you taking Jackson so high at number 3 when you can get Green, and you don't really need another ruckman. So, obviously that's a full club decision, but Taylor's driven that, hasn't he? He's the one who's convinced, as we saw on that footage. He's the one that's actively convincing Goody, listen, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And look at it. Never has a fella been proved more right, huh?
Look at it, a rising star and a kid that's kicked 3 goals in a preliminary final, and sky's the limit for the granny. Also, the pick swaps last year for us to move up into the draft and have 2 sort of late first round or early second round, to get Bowie and Laurie, into the team, and we'll see what Laurie does eventually, I'm sure. But look at Bowie's 6 games. He's playing in a grand final in his 7th game.
Yeah, I reckon that Twitter feed, the magical Twitter feed about following the pick that we've traded to North Melbourne's gone dark, hasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And interesting, I saw about picks. I don't know where I saw it somewhere. No, there was an article about. Actually, I put it up on Demon. I haven't read the whole thing. In the Herald Sun, they've done 20 moments that sort of made Melbourne what we've just all the moves, and one of them talked about the Lever trade, and I said we'd never talk about the Lever trade again, but the interesting about that trade is, as part of that trade, we received a 2nd round pick from Adelaide, their 2nd round pick, as part of all the picks, the swaps and all that. That pick was used on Petty. Right. So we got Lever and Petty effectively in that same swap.
Very nice. And did you see number 3 on that list, Andy?
I haven't gone through the whole thing. I sort of had a quick peruse of it. So
number 3 was that is the good one, the right guy thread on Melbourne. Apparently, it's been very influential. And just on that, there's a myth that I heard promulgated again by I think Del Santo, that apparently by what's his name, the Melbourne supporting news hound,
Tom Morris.
Oh, please, I'm going to weep. I'm going to write to him, and I don't normally write. On the back of not reviewing the 2018 prelim, 2019 was a wipeout. What the? That's I couldn't believe that. So you shouldn't have brought that up, Andy. I'm really upset now.
All right.
I think you read that on Demonland, and it's not true. Anyone who thinks that we didn't review it is just cannot be serious about.
Well, that was the comment that was made by Gordon himself.
But of course they reviewed it. Come on, Jesus! Lying is the first language of football, apparently. Jesus.
All right, we'll leave it there because we won't. I don't want to anger be man anymore. We don't need to make him angry.
Don't make me. I don't want to be a demon trucker and not angry. Just one final thing, Andy.
Sure,
it's great to see in the chat room. We've got 2 Amsterdam fans who are in Amsterdam, and we've got Terence in
Belgium.
We've got Am Demon and Amsterdam D's fan in presumably Amsterdam. Terence in Belgium. The demon diaspora is very strong, and we've got Western Australians, and we're from all over the place on Demonland.
Well, how good was the crowd? Before we go, we'll talk about that. It was like the final at the MCG that we played against Geelong, where it was overwhelmingly Melbourne, and I'm not sure if that was because they were all Melbourne supporters or there was some Eagles and Dockers that jumped on Melbourne, or I don't know if there's any neutrals out in the West, and they jumped on the D's, but it was so fantastic. It felt like our home game.
Quite a number of them new posters to Demonland, it would seem. That.
Well, I'll tell you about that. So Demonland, I'm just going to log in to on the back end here to say how many new registrations we had this week. So going back 4 weeks ago, we had 0 registrations in the week, and usually you have 1 or 2 or whatever, and we had 0. The next week we had 5 registrations, then 11 registrations, then 11 the next week, and this week we've had over 100 new registrations in the last week, and it's been the last few days, and it's hard because there were people who were obviously coming on to look for barcodes, which it was legal. We weren't sure last week whether it would be legal to sort of trade barcodes because we can't use them. So there were people looking for barcodes. The overwhelming majority of those new registrations had IP addresses located in WA. You can see that I can see that on the back end of Demonland. The problem is, and it was up to every individual how they wanted to divvy up their own barcodes. But my code for doing that was I wanted to give it to either people I knew who are Melbourne, because I know some Melbourne supporters in Perth who live in Perth and wanted to sort them out. But I wanted to give it to long-term Demonlanders, which I did. I had a few within the family to give away, and I didn't want to just give it to someone new. And they might have been Melbourne supporters, but there's no way to know. And for me, I didn't want to give it to someone, not because they're an Eagles or a Dockers fan, because
they're not Melbourne fans.
But I also didn't want to give it to a scalper, and my ticket ends up, some poor bugger has to pay $1,000 to go. Or more to a footy match. So I didn't want to do that. So I apologise to any new people who came. And if you came and you're genuine D supporters, stick around and post and talk the Ds with us. And not just
come
leave.
to Melbourne next year, because you'll get to see another grand final.
Yes, hopefully. But yeah, it was. We did get an influx of people, but look, I don't know whether they're Dockers. There was one outright said, I'm an Eagles fan, I just want a ticket, I want to go to a grand final. So I appreciate the honesty, so I gave him a ticket. No, I didn't, but there were...
Never have I felt more loved as a Demon.
They were using you, loving you and leaving you.
Just one more thing, Andy. If for Terence and for Amsterdam Demon, we want to see some indication of your support all the way from the other side of the world in the Fly the Flag thread. Show us what you've got hanging outside your house in Demon. Where
I'm not sure what the equivalent to the Eiffel Tower is in Amsterdam, but yeah, I'd love to see a Demon's paraphernalia somewhere, perhaps in Amsterdam in the red light district would be nice to see a flag flying.
I was going to suggest the Rijksmuseum, but anyhow.
So show us you flying your flag overseas or anywhere. There is a flying the flag thread on Demonland where you can show anything you've done. Interesting. I told you how I put up some stuff on my front gate, and I have one of those cameras there you can go on your phone and you can sort of see that, so I can see if someone defaces my property. But I noticed a magpie has been hanging around on my front lawn. I might post it up on Demonland later. Seems like they're keeping watch over it. So thank you to the magpies for that, doing a great service. Did you guys see the Melbourne supporter who put up, it was up on the news, and it was on Twitter, and a Bulldog supporter ripped it down, but they were caught on his Ring camera and was on the news.
I did see that.
Poor form.
Yeah,
you can't deface.
Quite funny, I reckon.
But you know what? People do that grand final week, and I love it. I always love seeing it, and I've been going for a couple of runs the last week or so, and I've noticed a lot of Demons in my area. There's not many. I haven't seen any Bulldogs actually. It's all Demons, but it's such bad form to pull that down at this time of year, regardless of who you support or don't support.
You can get arrested for that, and so you should.
Yes, so they should, and more importantly, take their membership away from them. I noticed that they gave up they left one of their scarves, which was the 2017 scarf, which was incident the year after they played in the grand final, and then didn't make the finals the next year. So that must have been the scarf they didn't want to keep. All right, boys. Let's end it on that note. Thank you, Big Man. Thank you, George. We will be back next week with our preview show of the grand final. Can you believe it, guys? We're in a grand final. I started this website in the year 2000. We made the grand final that year, and I thought with this website there'll be grand finals every year, or at least a lot more than there have been in between then and now, which is zero. So we're in a grand final, boys. We'll discuss it next week, and go Demons.
See you
Go
then.
Red Leggers.